as soon as the report clear.
Okay, sir. So as you know, today's session is all about knowing how we can develop pluggable API in more object-oriented way. So I have created a small project for the same. Uh, Before understanding the code, let's move to the request and response. So you can see the request. We have token and JSON str here. In JSON str, we have AGGR and data. Both are compulsory keys. Okay. In data array, we give the data, and in AGGR, we give the function what we want to perform on these data. So we have sum, average, and count. And in response, it has three keys: data, message, and status. Data will return the sum, average, and count, and message will show the success or any kind of failure message, and status will show the status of the request. Okay,
So
so
there are
let's.
two arrays. Like one array is of data array, which contains data on which we need to do either sum, we need to do sum, average, and count. So this is a aggregation function. And in the response, we will get sum of all the data, average, and the count. Yeah, that's fine. Please continue.
Mm, yes, sir. Now let's move on to the coding part. So first of all, we will see the request part, chat request. So here, as you have seen in the request, we have token and JSON str. So we have created a class for this. So you can see we have token and JSON str object, and request object is for getting the request from the body of the request. Okay. So these these are the getter and setter method for these three variables, and then we have a static class which will return the stat request class
So
in
this is
which we hmm,
basically a factory method which will return the object of stat request, means this
hmm,
class. So can
uh,
you show from the starting so that she can correlate from this class, like
okay, okay,
this will be easy for her to understand.
okay, sir. Okay, sir. So I guess you are familiar with this. We have API validator for validating the keys,
Yeah.
like JSON str we have, and JSON data and AGGR as you have seen in the request. Okay, these are the compulsory. So we pass true, true, true. Next is our endpoint URL. Okay, stat is the endpoint URL, and then execute API. So we will first of all we will parse the request. So we will call the function parse request param. So we'll go to that function here. What we are doing, we are fetching the fetching the request body, and if the body is null, then we will return from then and there. Then we are parsing the request body. Okay, then if we are checking if the request body is we are checking by the validate syntax. We're validating the syntax. If it is true, then we'll proceed next, else we will return from then and there. Then we are fetching the token from the header part. If it is null, then we are fetching the header from the body. Okay, next is
Okay.
next we are fetching the body part, means we are fetching the token and separating the JSON str from there. So for this, we are
So
calling the factory method of stat request. Yes, sir.
yeah, so here like there is a change from the old and the new. Like in old we are using inner class, whereas here in the new concept we are taking a separate class for the request. So Damini, are you getting this?
Right, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, please continue.
So we are going to that factory method. Here we pass the request object, and as a string builder is for appending any kind of message. So here we have created an object of stat request, and we are getting the token. We are fetching the token from the request object, and we'll put that token into the object of stat request. Similarly, we are fetching the request object, which is this JSON object. So we are fetching that and calling the factory method of stat request JSON str. That is the sub, that is this data and aggr. So we have created a separate class for this also. I'll show you this. You
So
can see.
this is another class. You can say like for every level of request will be having a separate class. So for this request we are having a class, and now for this JSON str data and aggregate we are having a class. So this class will contain the object of this class. So if
Right,
you
sir.
see the code here, here only data array and like aggregate array.
We have only two variable, data array and aggr array, and these are the getter and setter method for this. And in the factory method of this class, we are passing the JSON str object. So we have created an stat request JSON str object, and we are putting the data array in the object of stat request JSON str. So you can see, and all the validation are also done here, like checking if the data array is present or not, or AGGR array is present or not. So both these validation and assigning the values are done here in this factory method. And at last, we are returning the stat request to JSON str object. You can see. So till now, are you
So,
clear?
so just wanted to add a few naming convention here.
Mhm.
So this is a class for JSON str. So this is LV JSON str. This is not a string. This should be an object. So what we can do is I am renaming it to JSON str obj, because this
Okay,
is
sir.
object of this class. That's
Yes,
why
sir.
I have added this obj. Okay, yeah,
Okay, sir.
please continue.
So, are you clear till now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Then we have next class as stat processor.
No, so
This
like
is
first, can you show from where we have called this factory method? We
okay,
have
okay,
called from here. So
okay, okay.
uh, stat request na.
Request para.
So we went inside this, and then here we are getting a new object of this. This we are assigning to LV request object. That is object of this stat request, and then we are returning it from here.
Yes, sir.
So get new API request will give you the request object. So this will become the request object. And this parse method is returning this request object back to here.
Yes, sir. AGGR request.
AGGR request here.
Hmm.
So
This
this is the
is
request class. Then we are also creating a separate class for processing of data. So what we all needed is sum, average, and count. So for those sum, average, and count, we are having a separate class. So for request, we are having a separate class. For processing, we are having a separate class. Yeah, Kajal.
hmm. So now we are getting the factory method of stat processor. So I'll show you. In this, what we are doing, we are just um, putting the value of AGGR request to the local object like stat request. We are putting this value over here. by set. In this, basically in this class we have four variable. First is stat request, which will hold the request, and these are the variable that we have to calculate, like count, sum, and average. These are the getter and setter method. So in the factory method, we are just putting the start request value to this object. Okay, and we are returning from here.
So this means like this processor will have request as well as all the calculations needed. So stat
Yes.
processor will contain the request object also, as well as like the new thing that needs to be calculated. Yeah.
Okay. Then we are moving, and now we are calculating, and we are calling the calculation method. And in the calculation, we have AGGR processor object, which contain, as you know, the request part and all the variables that we want to calculate, and response for getting the response, and string builder for appending any kind of message. So we are calling this stat utils calculation method. So we are going to that. So first of all, we are we are calling the check data validation. This is basically for converting long value to the double. So this is not that much important. Here we are, what we are doing,
Yeah,
we
but
are,
like for any kind of validations, we can do those validations on request and request object here. Plus, we can also like do some kind of conversions of data, like long to double or double to long, whatever is required by the overall pluggable API, that thing can be done here. So maybe like we can have two different methods: check data validation or and convert, do proper conversions, similar kind of methods. So that name we can decide ourselves. What name should be given to this method before we actually process the data? So like before we actually process the data, we are doing some kind of checking or conversions or whatever we can do here.
hmm, and we are fetching the JSON AGGR array that we have already put in the object of stat processor, and then we are traversing the wait, we are traversing the whole AGGR array, and taking each string, and trying to call that function accordingly. I'll show you. Like we have fetched the AGGR array, then we are traversing the whole AGGR array, and we are separating each string, and according to that string we are calling that function. Let's suppose we have first sum. As you can see, we have first sum, then operation is equal to sum, then we will go to this function get sum. Okay, this get sum,
Okay.
we are passing the stat processor object, and we are fetching the data array, and now we are traversing the whole data array, and we are adding values to that array, like I'm showing it. Like we
Yeah,
have
I
taken a
think-
variable.
yeah, it is understandable. Like
Yes, sir. So this is the function for adding the values, and similarly in the second function we have is a average. So we'll go to this function get average, and we will here what we are doing, we are getting the size by calling this function, and then we are calling the sum function, and then dividing it by size. So that's all about the average. And similarly we have count function, so we will call the get count function, and here you can see we are just returning the size of the array.
yeah, we are setting in the processor set count, set sum. So here the
Getter
set
and
method will
setter.
set the total calculated values here. Then from when we return from here, like we are putting this in the response object. So this response object will contain count, sum, average, all these three things once the loop is complete. And once
We
the
are
loop is
appending the
complete, we
success
will go
message.
out of this calculate method where we will be having a success message. And then from here, like we will be having response JSON object where all the response will be present. So response will be in the form of this.
Okay, sir.
So I think, Saudamini, you can correlate it with like what you learned from the older approach.
Yes, sir.
So do you have any questions?
No, sir. Not till now.
Okay. So what I can do is, like I, if you don't have any question, let me stop this.